So, for the past 4 weeks, we've been talking about the gospel according to Dynasty. That is, we've been looking at some of the Christian values that are evident in the show, and we've been relating those values back into the Bible and from the Bible forward into our lives. And this morning, I want to wrap up this series by talking a little bit about the relationship that we all have with our children. Of course, when you watch Duck Dynasty, one of the things that you really notice is that these are people for whom family matters. They run a family business, they go on family outings, they have family meals, they say family prayers. Family is big for these people. And when you see people for whom family works, and works well, there is, I think, a tendency for their wellness to reflect back upon your brokenness and make you feel bad, right? When you talk to people who seem to have this parenting thing down pat, when you think about how your friends' children are doing so much better than your children, one of the things that you inevitably feel is guilt. So before I get into this talk this morning, I thought it would be useful to begin with a little bit of group confession. Can we confess as a group of imperfect people that we have been imperfect parents? And can we further confess that in our imperfections we frequently find parenting difficult? And let me also, before I begin, in the interests of transparency, dispel any lingering delusions you may have about me, although why you would have any at this stage, I don't really know. I'm not, please be aware as I talk about this stuff, I am not a perfect father. Just like you, I'm trying to do the best job that I can to give my children the best start in life that I can. And recognizing that I'm not perfect and I'm deeply flawed, I'm therefore open to learn, in fact hungry to learn, some of the parenting wisdom that's found in the Bible. And why shouldn't I be? After all, everyone else has an opinion on the sort of parents we should be. The magazines that you read have an opinion on how you should parent. Your friends have an opinion. The people you meet at school drop-off have an opinion. Your parents have an opinion. Your parents-in-law, bless them, they certainly have their views, and that's all okay, that's fine, that's useful. But for this half hour, we're going to try and figure out together a little bit of the ancient parenting wisdom that's found in the Bible. And as we do so, we're saying together that parenting is one of the most daunting tasks in the world. It is one of the most difficult jobs that God gives us to do. And that being the case, we owe it to ourselves to learn as much as we can about some of the things the Bible says about this most difficult of endeavours. Fair enough? Yeah. Okay, throat cleared, and we're ready to go. Let me begin with a definition of what parenting is. Parenting is the process of teaching and training your children to leave. When we have children, it's not our intention that they should spend all their lives living in our home. One day, all being well, they're going to leave. And we do parenting well when our children are ready to leave, and leave well. I vividly remember when I was 18 years old, in a very small airport in the Highlands of Scotland, my mother crying her eyes out. I was about to fly, which I'd never done before, down to London, where I'd never been before, to catch a connecting flight to India. I'd never travelled anywhere in my life, I'd never left the family home, and here I was on my own about to head off to the subcontinent with a pair of flip-flops and a backpack, and thereafter I was heading straight to college and university and all that. So this airport moment was the moment I was leaving home. This was the moment I was going away and not going to come back and live ever again. This was it. And so my mother, as you can understand, was quite upset. But as upsetting as this moment was for her, this airport moment was a verification that she had done rather well. I don't suppose that raising me was all that easy. She'd done so as a single parent for a large number of years. I suppose being a mother to me had its challenges, as you can imagine, and yet challenges and issues and difficulties notwithstanding, here I was, confident enough and bold enough to go away, take on the world with some vision of what my future might look like. This is parenting. Getting our children ready to leave, and leave as well as they possibly can. The writer of the book of Proverbs in the Bible says this. He says, listen, parents, point your kids in the right direction. And then when they're old, they won't be lost. The word point there means to cause, to know, to give information. So this ancient wisdom in the Bible is saying that it's our job to give to our children the knowledge and the information that they need so that they can go and figure out for themselves how they can live in this world. And if we can only give that knowledge to our children, and if we can only drum it into their heads, because children are dumb, they need to be told repeatedly, then this wisdom is saying that when it comes time for them to leave our home, they will leave it knowing how to live, and live well. Now when this writer says, I don't think kids are dumb, by the way, I think they're incredibly smart. When this writer says, point your kids in the right direction, I think he's thinking about all sorts of things. Perhaps one of them is a general truth that the values and the morality that we instill in our children while they're living in our homes, when it comes time for them to eventually leave our homes, the chances are they'll do so with those values and with that morality. And so I think he's saying it's important to teach your children to be honest. It's important to teach your children to have respect for people, to have compassion for the poor, to be diligent, to be hardworking, and all that stuff. If those are the values that we instill in our children during their formative years, then when it comes time for them to leave our home, they won't do so valueless. Phil Robertson, the star of Dynasty, said of his experience as a parent, "My boys might have strayed from God's path for them at many times," and they did. They got into all sorts of nasty stuff. But they always had their faith to fall back on. It was in them when they were young. And regardless of the mess they got into when they were older, it stayed in them. And they had it to go back to. Similarly, I think if we can teach our children a wholesome view of God, and if we can teach them the idea that He's got something to do with the conundrum of life, if we can still instill that into them while they are children, then the odds are that when it comes time for them to leave our home, they will leave it and not attempt to do life entirely without God. Now, I use the phrase "the odds are" quite deliberately, because as is typical with this part of the Bible, this passage is not a promise. This piece of the Bible offers no guarantees that our children will respond to our parenting in a predetermined way. Life isn't like that, and nor would we wish it to be. This wisdom is just a general rule, and to every general rule there are, of course, exceptions. It's an observable fact that you can do everything right as a parent, everything, and yet your child can still choose to leave home and get everything wrong and live a damaged, wasted life. It's similarly an observable fact, and I hope this gives you hope, that you can do everything wrong as a parent, absolutely everything, and yet still your child can leave home and get everything right and live a useful, good, decent, human life. So please understand that this is just a general rule to which there are obvious exceptions, but nonetheless, as a general rule, it has tremendous value. Train your children to live properly, and then when they eventually leave your home, they will proceed to live properly. Another thing I think the writer is thinking about when he says point your kids in the right direction was that in addition to teaching them things like values and morality and spirituality and so on, that parents should help their children to discover and develop their natural interests and abilities and passions. It seems to me that pointing our kids in the right direction means helping them to discover the path in life that makes most sense for them. I have a good friend back in Scotland whom I hold in very high regard as a parent for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the way in which he pays attention to and subsequently guides his son's natural interests and abilities, all of which revolve around musical theatre. Now, to understand my admiration for this man, you have to first of all understand that in the staunchly working class, rough, dour environment that I come from, if your son comes home and says to you that he's interested in musical theatre, in 9 homes out of 10 that conversation doesn't go well. Get a real job, be a man, join the army, take up boxing, learn how to hang drywall is kind of how that conversation would typically go. But not my friend. My friend is wise enough to recognize the futility of pointing his son in a direction for which he has neither enthusiasms nor passions. So firstly, he instills in his son the notion of, okay, this is what you're interested in, this is what you're good at, this is what you're passionate about, so this therefore is what you should pursue with your life. There's no point in forcing yourself into a life that you're not interested in and about which you have no passion. Otherwise you're going to end up in a cubicle downtown hating every minute of your life. So do what you're good at, do what you're passionate about. I like that. And then in addition to that affirmation, he then passes on some of the business skills that he's learned over the years so that his son can make some cash out of the thing that he's passionate about. This is brilliant parenting. Why would we wish for our children to grow up and live lives detached from their passions and interests? So I like this simple wisdom. Just point your kids in the right direction. Not only the direction that is right morally and so on, but the direction that is right for them, and that makes sense for them. And you can take that or leave that, I suppose, like anything else. But according to the wisdom of the Bible, when it comes to children, parental guidance is always required. And the road, I think, to generational trouble is to abdicate our responsibility to shape and mould the lives of our children. The Talmud, I think, is right when it says that when we teach our children, we teach our children's children. And the reverse is true. When we fail to teach our children, we fail to teach our children's children. Daunting though it may be, the wisdom of the Bible is saying to us this morning, let's be parents, let's actually parent. After all, someone's going to tell our kids how they ought to live. And it can either be us, or it can be Disney, or MTV, or Miley Cyrus, or Justin the Beaver, or whatever they pick up on Facebook and YouTube, or the school playground. And I like all that stuff as well as everyone else. I like Disney. I watch Disney movies with my kid. But there's something in me that sees Snow White, living in fear of her stepmother and living in servitude for 7 dwarves, all the while singing wistfully, someday, someday, someday my prince will come, someday someone else will come and rescue me from the situation I'm in. And I like it, I'm not hung up about it or anything, but there's a part of me, particularly as the father of a daughter, that watches that and sees that and thinks, if my daughter was ever in that situation, I would not wish for her to wistfully sing, someday, someday, someone will come and rescue me. I want her to stand up and own responsibility for her own life and do something about her own life. I'd like her to go to her stepmother and say, hey, you can either come to grips with the aging process or not. But either way, you're not taking your issues out on me, all right? And then I'd like her to go to the servant dwarves and say, hey, clean up your own mess and cook your own food. Then I'd want to have a conversation with her about why she was living with 7 guys in the first place. And then, of course, I'd like her to come to her dad and ask her dad to find the prince for her, and then everything would be okay. I like music videos as much as the next person, and I always will, but I wouldn't want the music industry to be the principal educator in the life of my child. I'm not suggesting that we should stop our children watching television or listening to music. I think that would be a stupid thing to say. I just think that we are the ones who ought to principally instill the values that we hope our children to live with, and which we hope them to take with them into the culture into which one day they hopefully boldly will go. And unless we make an intentional decision to instill wisdom and values and life skills into the lives of our children and point them in the direction that makes most sense, we'll be abdicating that role and giving it to the powerful, savvy messengers of our culture. And in so doing, I think we will be setting them up to live slightly diminished lives. The Bible pleads with us. It speaks to us with 3,000 years of error and mistake and learned wisdom. Take responsibility for this. Parent your children. And of course, I think part of the pain of this is that the most effective teaching we give to our children is not with our lectures, but with our lives. We teach them as much, if not more, by the choices we live in front of them than we do by the words we speak to them. And one of the annoying things I think about all children is that they are in fact not dumb. And they see things in us that others don't. And irrespective of what we say to our children, they see what we actually live for and what we're actually all about, and the lives we actually live in front of them leave an irremovable impression upon their souls, and they take that with them for life, either for good or for ill. And so this wisdom of Proverbs wants us to be thinking very seriously about the impression that our lives are leaving upon the impressionable lives of our young children. Look at what the writer says. This is interesting. He says, the righteous man leads a blameless life. Blessed are his children after him. Now, I think that's as interesting for what it doesn't say as for what it does say. So notice, please, that it does not say that the child whose parents gets him into every sporting opportunity will have a blessed life. Notice it does not say that the child whose parents ensure that they become accomplished musicians will live a blessed life. It does not say that the child whose parents push them towards every educational opportunity and every cultural experience will have a blessed life. The wisdom of the Bible is so much more simple than those things. It says that the child whose parents live good lives before their impressionable eyes are blessed. Why is that doing that? Is that maybe okay. I gotta keep my bum still. Which when you've got as much rhythm as me is difficult. I think this particular sentence causes us to have a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves whether or not we are pursuing a righteous life. Do we even know what that looks like in the choices we make and the morality that we keep and how we talk about people or not talk about people at the dinner table? Do our children see a good life on display? What impression of life do they get as they watch how we choose to live? This is rather awful, isn't it? It makes it all sound rather difficult. Let's change tack a little. Parenting begins here. Yes. Aw. With a cute little bundle of love, a bundle that brings to us all indescribable amounts of joy and happiness. And yet, for all of the considerable joys of parenthood, the wisdom of the Bible never, ever, ever drifts into sentimentality. Quite the reverse. The Bible suggests that there is another side to rearing these cute little creatures. The reality is that they have a streak of something in them that is going to make parenting an intense, character-building challenge. There are no exceptions to this rule. The parenting drama always stretches parents to the limits of human wisdom and their abilities to cope. What is the source of this challenge? We'll look at what the writer says. He says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, and the rod of discipline will remove it from him. Here's something that you need to know, and the younger and cuter your children are, the more you want to push back and disagree with this statement. But your child has within him or her the propensity to ruin his or her own life. I know what you're thinking. You can't say that, Darren. You don't know my kid. My kid is amazing. My kid is a good person. My kid is cute. My kid is lovely. I know they all are. But at what point did you have to sit your kid down and teach them how to misbehave? Like, how did that work in your home? How did it go for you? Okay, son, you're 2 years old now. It's time we taught you how to bite other kids. Oh, really, Mummy? No, not I. I am too pure of heart. Please do not teach me such things. Is that how it went in your home? At what point did you have to sit your daughter down and teach her not to share and not to hoard and not to fight with the girls next door? You know, doing the wrong thing comes naturally to our children, just like it comes naturally to us. And for this reason, the Bible says that we must discipline our children. We must teach them to grow up with self-control. We must teach them how to live within limits and boundaries, because when they leave our home and set up a home of their own, they will do so in a society that requires them to live within limits and boundaries. My own view on this is that rules in a home should be kept to a minimum. And the less silly those rules are, the better. The Bible, in good sense, would counsel against being excessively hard with rules and with our kids. Phil Robertson from Dynasty takes this view as well. He says, my philosophy of discipline is very simple. Since rules are made to be broken, isn't that just sensible? Rules are made to be broken. Let's just accept it. Since that's the case, I kept the rules few and far between. However, there was a rule in my home. 3 licks was the standard punishment. So there aren't many rules in this house. The only rules that are there are the ones that really matter, and if you break them, you're just going to get hit 3 times with a belt or whatever, and that's how he went about doing it, which I kind of like, because in the real world there are limits. We do not wish there to be, but there are. There are limits to how much we can spend, how fast we can go, how freely we can live. The society in which we live does not accept boundary-free living. There are rules, there are parameters beyond which a person may not go, and so it is therefore really stupid to allow our children to enjoy boundary-free living. For their own good, they need to be taught that there are limits to what a person might say, and how much a person might spend, and how a person might behave, and what a person might do. And if they're not taught that, if they don't get that from us, then when they leave our homes and set up their own home, they're going to get into bother. The odds are. Now, let me end with a caveat. And if you have any questions at the end, we can do that too. When you read the sorts of biblical things that we've read this morning, you can often get the wrong idea. The Bible, from a certain point of view, feels like a list of rules and how you always break them. That's just sometimes how the Bible feels. And that's the heart-breaking thing about parenting. If you've gotten it wrong, well, you don't get to go back and get it right. And so all you can do is feel bad about the fact that the family values in the home that you were responsible for were somewhat askew. And into such badness of feeling that I know many of us inevitably feel, let me say this. When we talk about family values, we're talking about something that isn't biblical. We're talking about something that's political. To speak about family values is to speak about the political belief, largely dating from the 1970s, that the family unit is the essential unit of society. And so this phrase, family values, is used by politicians and social commentators of every stripe to describe what they think, from their perspective, are the elements that make up this essential unit of society. And in certain circles, the phrase family values is synonymous with the equally insidious phrase Christian values. And I say that that's an insidious phrase because, of course, those values do not necessarily come from the Bible, but simply from the prejudices in the mind of the person who happens to be using the phrase at the time. And it's quite an effective way of manipulating you and controlling you. I'm going to tell you what Christian values are. I'm not going to take them from the Bible, I'm going to take them from up here. But because I've used the word Christian, you now have to agree with me. This is how it goes. The Bible, you see, does say some prescriptive things about family life, and we've looked at a few of those this morning, and they're pretty good. But in the whole, the biblical descriptions of family life are as far removed from the biblical prescriptions as our own are. I can't think of a single good family story in the Bible. I can think of plenty of messed up, broken, ugly, damaged, horrible family stories in the Bible. The kind of family stories you would never read to your children. Stories where the whole thing just falls apart and doesn't work. The Bible, in fact, in many ways is an ugly story about ugly people who live ugly lives, and woven through the story, for sure, there is this theme of hope and redemption and a happy ending in the future. But nonetheless, the story as it's actually lived is nasty. And I wanted to say that because I do not want for you to leave here today and get caught up in this false saccharine-coated guilt about your own situation that is messy. I know it's messy. Life is messy. Our faith comes from a messy place. It always has been and always will be. And of course, it's often particularly messy at home. That isn't in antithesis to the Bible. It reflects the Bible. And so I realised that talks like this raise more issues than they answer. And I realise, believe me, that talks like this are felt deeply. They are in many ways just a description of the water that we're drowning in. Nevertheless, and sometimes you have to say nevertheless, I know it's tough, but nevertheless. I know your situation sucks, but nevertheless. I know some days you barely think you're going to get by, and you're racked with guilt about how it's gone, and if you could do it all again differently you would, and you feel all that, but nevertheless. Nevertheless. If your children are still young, they're still at home, be encouraged, be inspired to teach them and train them to leave your home and leave well as good, decent, fine young men and women who will not seek to do life badly and without God. If you have teenagers living in your home and you're finding that the business of being a parent to your teenagers is particularly challenging, I want to say two things to encourage and inspire you. Number one, the Bible says, thou shalt not commit murder. Number two, the teen years are incredibly complex. And knowing how to effectively communicate and parent your teenager and how to resolve issues with them and discipline them is not easy. It's been said that the adolescent years are a time of rapid aging. Between the ages of 13 and 19, parents age 20 years. Take it easy. Be gentle. Don't be too harsh. Don't freak out. Do the best that you can. And maybe your children have left home, and maybe you're not happy about how they've chosen to live. Maybe you feel bad about some of the things that you think you should have done differently, and if you could, you would. Well, let me encourage you. You don't get to do things differently. Of course you weren't a perfect parent. There's no such thing. But you did the best job you knew how to do. And now your little boy and little girl aren't a little boy and little girl anymore. They're no longer under your control. And so it's no longer up to you to teach them and train them and discipline them. They're adults. And they will make their own choices in life, just like you did. And it's fair enough for you to hope for the best and pray like crazy, just like maybe someone once did for you. Any questions on any of that stuff? Yes. Oh, you're very kind. Okay, go on. Okay, thank you. That's very kind of you. Lynn. Okay, so the question is about discipline and how physical it should get. Am I legally allowed to answer that question? Probably not. Can someone tell me? Okay, I think the principle is that the issue of whether discipline is physical or not is a sub-issue, really. But the important thing is that our children should not live without discipline. And it should be instilled in them that some things are right in our home, and some things are not right in our home. Some things we will put up with, and some things we jolly well won't. And they can't live any way they want, and they can't dictate how things are going to be in the home. And I think that's just good for them. As they get older, that becomes a challenge, but I think the younger we start, the better. I think the issue of physical discipline is, I don't think you can give an across-the-board answer, because I think every child is different, and every child should be handled differently. I mean, if you have 5 kids, I would expect that your interactions with those kids would be different in each case, and some forms of disciplines that work with some don't work so well with others. Well, I think that that's an interesting question. I think the church talks an awful lot more about that subject than Jesus did. And I think the important thing when we're talking about the values and the moralities and the religion that we would instill in the lives of our child, if it's going to be biblical, then it should be biblical across the board. I think that the horrible thing that the church does, as far as that subject is concerned, is it makes this subject as a be-all and end-all, when in fact Jesus said, I think, almost nothing about it. But he had plenty to say about stuff like how we treat the poor, and so on and so forth. I should also say that, and I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you before, but when you were talking there about how things are today and how things are for kids today, you sounded an awful lot like Aristotle, who said those very things. The youth of today, this is a phrase that comes from ancient Greece. The youth of today are corrupt, and the youth of today are living bad moral lives, and society is falling apart, and so on. People have been saying this about the next generation for thousands of years, and I think our species does a pretty good job at learning for itself how we will live in each generation, and so on and so forth. I don't think... I'm older now too, and I look at some things that young folk are into today, and yeah, it's different, and I'm not sure it's always different in a better way. However, I also look at young people today, and I think, they're a lot more confident than we were, a lot more intelligent in many ways than we were, and smarter and so on. I suppose we have YouTube to thank for that, and Google, but I'm not afraid about the next generation. I think they're actually brilliant and articulate and smart and really good at figuring things out for themselves. And I think of some of the young people in our church here, and I'm like, you're so much further ahead than I was at your age, and so much more able than I was at your age. And I don't think they need us, particularly when they get older, to lecture them. I think I think they can figure stuff out. I admire young people, actually. Partly because I'm jealous of them. It's wasted. Any more questions?
In the front row.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
You encouraged us with your words on children that were young and teenagers and adult children living out of the home. What about young adult children living at home?
Well, so the question was, what about young adult children living at home? And everyone laughs, and I think they laugh because this is a phenomenon nowadays, right? Parents, kids now, I suspect it's got something to do with the price of housing in this area, but we don't leave home at 18 and say, thank goodness, I can't wait to get out of here, never to be seen again, apart from Christmas and Thanksgiving. Now, for financial reasons, we live in the basement, and so on and so forth. Well, I don't know. Never thought about it. Young adults living at home, anyone got experience of this? Those nods look really frustrated nods. So I guess there's a limit to the sort of discipline we can. We can't be disciplining them and telling them how to live. I mean, they're adult human beings. I think a legitimate conversation is, yes, some of that stuff is not really on in my home. I'm not really into that, but they're adults. Just encourage them to leave. Actually, that's my answer to that question. Stop paying their stuff. Stop doing stuff for them. Cut off the money and they'll leave. That's how. Is that good advice? No? Brilliant advice. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes?
I found the best thing when they're older is really, it moves more into helping them to, you have to respect their adulthood, but also them to respect the home. And it's a matter of respect as opposed to you must obey.
That's good. Thank you. Shared wisdom. Okay, so there we go. Gospel according to Dynasty. That's that for that. Next week we're starting a new series called If Your Life Was a Movie, Would It Be Worth Watching? And no, I'm serious about this. This is one of those series that's been in my head for a while, and I'm really excited about it, and I'll tell you why. Imagine you went to see a movie about a guy who wanted a Volvo. And then at the end of the movie, the final scene, He drives out of the dealership with his Volvo. He's testing the windscreen wipers. And then the credits roll. That movie wouldn't inspire you, would it? It wouldn't encourage you. It wouldn't move you to tears. It would just be boring. And yet the sad reality is that many of us, we live lives just like that. That's our story. And yet we expect our life to be meaningful. So, really excited about this series. If your life were a movie, would it be worth watching next Sunday? Let me pray for you and then we'll go. Heavenly Father, we recognize that our children are yours before they are ours. And so we commit, where it's applicable, that we will do our best to guide them. We will do our best in our imperfect situation to live right before them. We will be wise in disciplining them. However, we also recognize and respect that they are people in their own right and have minds and wills of their own, and that one day they will go their own path and leave our home. And as we prepare them for leaving, we ask that you will prepare us for their leaving. And we say to you with belief that they are yours, wherever they are this morning, whatever they are going through, whatever they are up to, whatever they are into. And we entrust them to you. We ask for grace and mercy and peace and protection wherever they are. We ask this of you, hoping that your good and mysterious will lead them safely.